Hello, and welcome to this virtual panel, which we are calling The Many Adventures of Philip José Farmer, where we will be discussing some of Phil's heroes and the stories they inhabit. First, let me start with some introductions. My name is Paul Spiteri, and with Mike and Wynne, I'm a co-owner of Media House, where I mostly perform editing duties and add a smidgen of Britishness to the proceedings. Next, we have Mike Croteau. Mike, do you want to give us a wave? Raised eyebrow. Mike is a backbone of Media House and also runs the excellent PJ Farmer website. Next up, we have Wynne Scott Eckert. Well, Wynne, if you can give us a quick wave. Wynne is an established and accomplished author and has recently been working on the much anticipated Tarzan Battle for Pellucidar, Book 2 in the ERB Universe Super Arc. Next, we have Jason Aiken. Can you give us a bit of a wave, Jason? Hi. Jason discovered Farmer after hearing his name mentioned in reference to pulp characters and crossovers. He started with A Feast Unknown and has never looked back. As well as being a pulp expert, Jason is also a published author. And finally, certainly not least, we have Frank Schildiner. Frank is a prolific and exciting short story and novel writer who recently moved from horror to espionage in the exceedingly well-received Claire's Protocol. And I didn't ask you to wave, Frank, so I figured everybody could work it out, but good to see you wave. Okay, and certainly I apologise if I've sold anyone short in my introductions, but I'm sure we'll hear more from you as we go through this panel. Okay, I'm going to start with my first question, which is actually two linked questions. And the questions are, who is a favourite Farmer character and why? Feel free to give reasons and examples. And the second part, if you could transplant that character into a totally unconnected farmer adventure story, what would that be? And what might you expect to happen in those adventures? I'm going to put somebody on the spot, and apologies. Frank, are you okay to go first?
Of course.
Excellent.
Well, my favorite character is Lord Grunneth from A Feast Unknown and Lord of the Trees, which is no surprise since everybody knows I love the world of the Nine. I think it's a rich world, and I think that in creating it, Philip José Farmer created a really great what-if of the pulp world, in a sense of what if the bad guys won originally? How would these pulp characters become different? And you see that in Lord Grunneth especially, because the first book, A Feast Unknown, is from his point of view. And it gets a lot of negative press from the pulp fans because of the sex and violence in it, not realizing that it's almost a lampoon of the concept of the 50s, 60s, and 70s sweat mags and things like that as well. So I've always found the character very interesting because there's a lot of development in a very short period of time with this character, plus in a kind of self-analysis, as well as even a tribute to something I was into before I ever even knew there was a Philip José Farmer, which was true crime involving Jack the Ripper. I used to be a ripperologist, if there's a word for that. Oh yeah, it's a strange field of study, but I discovered it at 4th grade, and probably too little too early to discover these things. But
thanks a lot.
yeah, I found it in a book, and I started reading about it, and then of course the same day I found the book of lists had like a list of all of these people who were suspects, and not a good day for the psyche, but interesting stuff came out of it. As to a different place I would take Lord Grunneth, my first thought was initially to the Lord Tiger world, which is even a real world version of Tarzan, and an interaction between two such characters. I mean, Lord Tiger and Grunneth are so vastly different, even with the same basis. I really think that would be an interesting interaction, as well as a possible storyline. So there's a whole thing that's never really been addressed, is the idea of what if some of these jungle characters interacted. How would it be different? Mowgli appeared in Philip Jose Farmer's story, but we didn't see like how he would deal with, say, a Kygor or a Khazar or a Tarzan or Lord Grunneth. So that's my thought.
Perfect. And I expected no less, but I was very impressed that with the pronunciation of Grunneth. And just for anybody who perhaps isn't aware, that is how you pronounce it.
Happily, I had you and Win say the word before I actually said it out loud. And so then from that moment on, I listened to the two of you on that stuff.
Excellent. Good.
Oh, wait, has he been talking about Lord Grandrith this whole time?
Oh.
I know you know better, Mike. Thanks, Frank. Jason, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. My favorite Farmerian hero probably doesn't come as a big surprise to anybody that knows me. I'm a big fan of the Ancient Opar series, and my favorite Farmerian hero is Quasine. Some people may pronounce it, Quasen, but that's how I always pronounced it. But just over the years, talking to Christopher Paul Carey, I've learned that it's Quasine, so I'm just using that pronunciation. I like Quasine because I'm a big fan of sword and sorcery fiction, a big Robert E. Howard fan, Conan, Call, and I also enjoy some of the more epic heroes of old, like Beowulf, Hercules, reading those old epic poems. And Quasine is kind of a hybrid of those and a Farmerian hero as well. He's introduced, you first meet him in the first book of the Ancient Opar series, Hedon of Ancient Opar. You don't really get inside his head, though. He's a supporting character, and he's kind of an anti-hero in that book. But again, like Farmer displays him and presents him as like someone who's larger than life. He's basically like a 7-foot, bearded, muscled wrecking ball. Especially once he gets the Axe of Victory, he becomes pretty formidable. So he's definitely my favorite. As far as who I would like to see him, or what series I'd like to see him, cross over with, I think it would be interesting to cut him loose on Aloth Methben, which is more commonly known as the World of Tears, or Jadawin's world. Yeah, I'd like to see him, and eventually him and Kekaha would meet up with each other and get into some trouble there, and probably pretty much just have the run of the place.
Okay, but do you think they'd be friends or adversaries?
I think at first maybe probably adversaries, but they both have kind of like that wild trickster aspect to their characters. Yeah. So I think they probably could realize pretty quickly, oh, hey, we could have a lot of fun here together if we,
let's rule the
like forces.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
Mike, you're up next, Mike.
Sure. Okay. Well, Jason just mentioned the character that I chose to talk about today, which is Kekaha. He's definitely my favorite farmer character. For those who don't know, Phil, when he wrote the Riverworld series, there's a character in there named Peter Jarris Frigate, who has the same initials as Phil, PJF. Well, Kekaha, his name back on Earth before he goes to the World of Tears was Paul Janus Finnegan, also PJF. And Phil has said that Peter Jarris Frigate from the World of Tears series is very much, from the Riverworld series, is very much how he is in real life, and the other PJF, Kekaha, is how he wishes he was. Much more adventurous, basically Tarzan with a sense of humor, no Victorian restraints, will raid a village, plunder, piss in the stew pot as he runs out of, as he runs away from 20 warriors trying to catch him. And I think Phil probably had more fun writing Kekaha than a lot of other characters. You just kind of get a little bit of his joy, and because he's probably thinking, well, this is what I would do here, if I could. And there's one of my all-time favorite scenes. I don't think I'm spoiling anything here, but on the World of Tears, he's being chased by a bunch of centaurs. Now, there's a sentence you don't hear every day. And as they're chasing him across the plains, his escape route is cut off by a herd of stampeding buffalo. So the only thing Kekaha can do is jump onto the back of a buffalo and then jump to another buffalo and another, getting further into the herd. And the centaurs are so enraged that he's getting away that one of them itself is almost as big as a buffalo, tries to jump on the back of a buffalo to chase him across, and that doesn't end well. But just, the how much fun I think Phil had writing that scene. And as Jason mentioned, he is very much a trickster character. Phil was very well read in mythologies, both the Greeks and American Indian, and mythologies from all across the world. And one thing I believe he noticed was that most mythologies have a trickster character. I think Phil is usually drawn to that character. When he did his genealogy, he actually traced his family line all the way back to Odin. So, there you go. As for, Paul posed the question, what story or world would you like to see your favorite character go play in? And I had a hard time picking one. In fact, what I've decided is since he already has access to gate technology that he can go through to get to different worlds, if we give him a little bit of time traveling capabilities, he could pop up anywhere. And I want to write a bunch of very short, like 1,000 word stories where Kekaha just pops up in the middle of something and just ruins it. And just totally wreaks havoc.
Being a trickster.
And, boom, just totally messes up, something. Take a familiar scene from one of Phil's books, like Venus on the Half Shell or a Riverworld scene or some scene people are going to recognize, and just totally destroy it and then disappear, and you have no idea what happens afterwards. Now, I'm not going to actually do that, but it would be so much fun to do something like that.
It would be interesting if you could, integrate that into story, so that's actually what happened in the story. So,
Oh, yeah, you didn't realize
that Kekaha actually does something.
Even better. Okay, that's why that building suddenly exploded, because Kekaha was over there behind the scenes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I have to give that more thought.
Pin in that one. Thanks, Mike. Win, you're up.
So before I answer the question about my favorite character, I just wanted to comment quickly on something that Mike said about where Phil did his own genealogy and traced it back to Odin. In the magic filing cabinet, which is all of Phil's papers, not all of his papers, some of his papers went to universities, but the papers that we have access to are quite a good store of papers. I located a handwritten sheet that did not make it into the genealogies of Tarzan Alive or Doc Savage, the Wold Newton genealogies, that essentially has Odin as the literal ancestor of the Wold Newton family. I mean, it's drawn out in a family tree chart. Obviously, I didn't make it into the book, but I just thought that
is actually
pretty cool. So the character that I picked was Doc Caliban, which is Phil's Doc Savage analog in the World of the Nine. And some of you may know, or some people watching this may or may not know, but essentially Phil's Doc Savage biography, Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life, was my introduction to Phil. That was my first Philip Jose Farmer book. And so I kind of have a special affinity for the Doc Savage or the, you know, the Doc Caliban type of characters. And on top of that, I decided to pick Doc Caliban because I'm actually writing a Doc Caliban book right now from Phil's manuscript. Certainly there's going to be quite a bit of Phil's prose in it as well. It's a co-authored book, and his outline, The Monster on Hold. So I just thought, yeah, it's Doc Caliban, at least for today. You know, next year it might be a different character, right? If you ask me the same question. Doc Caliban is different from Doc Savage in many ways, the same way as Frank pointed out that Lord Grunneth is different from his analog, Tarzan, Lord Greystoke. And it's a world of the Nine where, you know, essentially they are, the bad guys are secretly in control of the world. And so Doc Caliban is raised to be, you know, just like Doc Savage, this Superman, super science, high technology, you know, righter of wrongs and punisher of evildoers. And yet there's this tension because he's also working for the Nine, who are not really good people. And so what's interesting to me from the character perspective is, how does Doc reconcile that with himself? And I think what we see in A Feast Unknown is the result of that cognitive dissonance, right? I mean, certainly in A Feast Unknown, Doc Caliban and Lord Grunneth are suffering the effects of the elixir. And that's sort of a very physical explanation for what's happening to them. They're taking this elixir, and they're finally paying the price for taking the elixir so many years, and they're having these uncontrollable reactions, right? Which are, you know, interfering with their mission and with their sanity. But is there maybe something more going on? Maybe there's also some cognitive dissonance of this person who was raised to be this crime-fighting Superman, and yet occasionally he gets sent on missions for the Nine that are probably pretty unsavory, right? And so he's made that bargain with himself that he wants the elixir, and he wants to be an immortal. So it's kind of like this trade-off. Well, if I'm immortal and I can live forever, I can fight crime forever. But sometimes I have to do these really nasty things for the Nine, right? And so to me, that's intriguing for that character. And it's different from the Doc Savage character, who's not beholden to that. You know, the Doc Savage character is just completely straight, and you don't really get into that sort of psychological or the inner workings of his mind, which is fine. You shouldn't for Doc Savage, right? Doc Savage should be completely pure and unadulterated. But it's interesting to me to see sort of that push and pull in the Doc Caliban character. And you see it at the end of A Feast Unknown too, when finally, after the great battle, you know, the hold of the elixir on Doc Caliban is broken, and he sees the light, and he sees what's been happening to himself, both during the course of the novel and probably for what's been happening to him for decades. And he cries. There are tears. And, you know, the Doc Caliban character and Doc Savage, you know, very emotionless, doesn't show his emotions a lot, very much like Spock is supposed to be, you know, and a sort of an emotionless Vulcan character. And then it's revealed that, no, there's a real human being, you know, deep inside there who is suffering. We don't really get to see too much of that in the follow-up Doc Caliban book, The Mad Goblin. That doesn't get explored a lot in that book. It's, you know, a straight adventure, which is great. It's a great book, and just a fun adventure romp. But I think it'd be intriguing to explore a little bit more of that cognitive dissonance that Doc Caliban must have been going through for all of his life. And I hope to explore a little bit of that in A Monster on Hold. So that's why, that was very long, I'm sorry, but that's why I picked Doc Caliban. Where would I send Doc Caliban in terms of other Phil's worlds? I think it would be interesting to put him on the H.G. Wells 1 expedition, the time ship, in Time's Last Gift. Like, what if you substituted John Gribbertson? What if you swapped out John Gribbertson? What if Doc Caliban had been the guy, the leader of the expedition instead? What would that have looked like? What would he have done back, 14,000 years in the past? Would he have introduced more scientific, things back in that time? What would the world look like if he had gone back in time and stayed there, and then as an immortal lived forward through time? So that's sort of an intriguing what if.
It is.
Interesting.
Very.
Hey, Paul, before you give yours, I want to ask a quick question. So Wynn said that Doc Savage, His Apocalyptic Life, was the first farmer he ever read. So the Doc Savage, the Doc Caliban. Frank said that A Feast Unknown was the first farmer he read. You did say that, right?
Yes.
I believe. And so, there, from there we got his favorite character. I didn't mention this, but The World of Tears was actually the first farmer I ever read, and Kekaha became my favorite character. So I was just curious if Jason, was Hadan of Ancient Opar the first farmer you ever read?
No, actually, it was A Feast Unknown.
Oh,
was the first one I read. Yeah.
Oh, well, so much for that theory. It's interesting.
And I will break it as well, because
A Feast Unknown was the first farmer I almost read. I only read about 10 pages of it, but I was like 13 years old, so.
We bit too young for that, maybe?
Too young.
Yeah. My first was a short story. It was Riverworld, the Riverworld short story, and the first novel was Dark is the Sun. But I'm actually going to choose a different character and story, and I'm going to go with Ulysses singing there in A Stone God Awakens. And the reason, it's tough, as Wynn said, it's tough to pick a favourite out of the pantheon that Farmer created. And even though I couldn't say that Ulysses is my favourite character, he's certainly a favourite character. And I think why that is it's not unique to Farmer, but Ulysses doesn't come to the story as a hero. He's, he isn't a Kekaha, he isn't a Caliban, he isn't anything like that. He's a research scientist in Syracuse, New York, experimenting with an atomic stasis machine, accidentally gets stoned, so turned to stone. He's working on a project called Project Niobe, Niobe being the granddaughter of Zeus, who was stoned for disrespecting the gods. So, obviously picked a very farmer name for a project like that, I think. So he's stoned. Obviously, that links in with Dayworld, where there are similar there is similar technology. Interestingly, both Slice Crosswise, World on a Tuesday, and Stone God Awakened were written 70, 71 respectively. Dayworld came a little bit later. So it feels as if there's this idea about atomic stasis was something that Phil was thinking about, and it diverged into two storylines. So for Stone God, Ulysses is stoned. He, for whatever reason, can't be unstoned. So, to him, an instantly stoned, he wakens sometime in far, far future. The Bedlam, wakes up right in the middle of a battle scene, finds out he's on a version of Earth, inhabited by many sentient species. Some of the species he recognizes from Earth, cat-like, raccoon-like, and various other bat-like creatures, etc. And he's got all this knowledge, so he's in an advantageous position. He can bring technology, even very simple technology like the bow and arrow, which doesn't exist in this world, to these people. As well as being a god, he's now a leader, a diplomat. He starts to group all the tribe together, goes on a fantastic adventure to this planet, almost planet-girdling tree that is so large. And one of the things I love about this story is that Phil described boats sailing along rivers along the branches of this tree. So it's that big. all the while, he's looking for answers to, how far in the future is he? Is it millions of years or is it billions of years? Is he even on Earth? Though he figures he is on Earth because he can see the moon in the sky, albeit it looks to be terraformed. He thinks, it's too much of a coincidence that a body is up there that looks like the moon. So he goes through all these adventures and tries to fight the tree. I won't really spoil how he gets on with that, but it's full of little farmer snippets. Mark Twain has mentioned the Arabian Nights, River. It's obviously a big one. And there are blimps. And who doesn't love a story without a blimp or two? So it's a great adventure story. Phil, I know, envisaged it as a three-parter. So, unfortunately, we've only got this copy or this story, so we don't get to find out what happens next. But I'd like to think A Visit to the Moon was going to be somewhere in there. So that's, I think, why Ulysses is one of my favourite characters. And as to where I would see him having an adventure, I'm going to cheat a little bit because, as much as he's a man of advanced technology in A Stone God Awakens, it'd be interesting to put him in an environment where the world is more advanced than he is. So I'm going to go for Dayworld, which is kind of linked to Stone God through the stoning process. And I just think it'd be interesting to see somebody like Ulysses in Dayworld, being a daybreaker, how he would cope. He's a very different character to Jeff Caird. Much more diplomatic, much more stable. It would just make for an interesting adventure. Okay. Let's move on to our next question. And so conversely to this discussion we've just had, I'm wondering which character do you not relate to, or you have difficulties with, whether it's because of the way it's been written by Phil, so by design, or you just don't empathize with that character? And I appreciate this is a bit of a tricky question, so I'll give people some leeway, absolutely. And I'll go first just to set the ball rolling, and I expect a sharp intake of breath when I say my character is Hal Yarrow from the Lovers short story and the novel. And the reason for that is I always feel a bit of pain when I read that story. Hal is, comes from a culture very repressed, always inspecting himself internally, goes on an expedition to another planet. This planet is inhabited by alien creatures, where their society is much looser. And on this planet, he meets a woman, Jeanette, and falls in love with her, and they start a relationship together, and he hides her from everybody, and they have a relationship. But Hal is, because of his upbringing, is a little bit concerned because Jeanette drinks, and she likes her alcoholic drinks. So he substitutes her drink for a non-alcoholic version. Now, what he doesn't realise is that Jeanette's species, because she isn't truly human, uses alcohol as a contraceptive. So she ends up falling pregnant. And I know it's a bit spoilerish, but the real kicker here is that her falling pregnant means that she will die in childbirth. So Hal, trying to do the right thing, based on how he's been brought up, basically ruins everything and ends up being the cause of the death of his true love. And that I just find really painful. And every time I read it, I scream, "No, don't do that! Don't swap for the non-alcoholic, for the alcohol." But every time he does it, it never changes, no matter how many times I read it. So every time I walk away a little bit, saddened. So that's why I picked Hal. Okay, so let's. Do we go in reverse order? Is that okay? Win, are you okay to go first?
Sure.
Go for it.
Yeah. I'm not going to answer it exactly the way you posed it, but there's some farmer books that I just come back to and I can read again and again and again. And then there are others that, you know, I kind of have a feeling about. As much as I love Phil's work, I kind of read those and I'm just not, I don't know, for some reason I'm not really impelled to go back and, you know, I've got to read this set again. And so it's not that I don't really like the character. Maybe it is because I can't relate as much. I'm not sure, but it's the Harold Child books, which again, I enjoyed them. I thought they were really cool and I enjoyed reading them, but they're not, for some reason, they're not books that resonate with me, that make me want to go back and read again and again and again. And maybe they're just too bizarre, but I don't think that's it, because Phil's bizarre stuff doesn't really put me off. I mean, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't bother me. But there's nothing, it almost feels like everything's just happening to him in that book. And maybe that's why, maybe that's the key to it, right? He's not really one of Phil's traditional protagonists in which the protagonist takes some agency. And certainly there are many farmer books with many protagonists where things are just happening to the characters, and there's despair and there's bad things raining down on these characters. But at some point they take some agency, right? And they sort of take control and they start doing things and driving what happens themselves, right? They start fighting back. And I may be misremembering the Harold Child books, but Harold Child books didn't really strike me as he was that type of character that really ever sort of, you know, said, well, I got to figure this out and start fighting back. It just seemed like it just kept on happening to him, and that was it. I don't know. I mean, it's probably not the best answer in the world, but that's.
And it's intrigued me because it makes me want to go and read through them again. Because I think you're right. I think, you know, things happen to him through the course of the books. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like.
And if anyone remembers differently, if anyone's read them more recently than I have, and you know, wants to correct me, feel free, because it has been a while since I've read them. But that's kind of my feeling about why I haven't gone back to them and read them again. Once was enough.
That's a challenge out to everybody to do that. Okay, thanks, Win. Mike, I think you're next.
Okay. I had a hard time with this question. Trying to think of, you know, any characters I specifically really didn't like, and I ended up going through the PJF website, looking at all the novels and looking at all the stories, and one did jump out at me. It's called The Essence of the Poison, and it was actually from Phil's trunk. It was one that wasn't published until we pulled it out, and Paul actually edited this collection, Pearls from Peoria, and it appeared, well, now I'm having a senior moment. Was it in Pearls or was it in Farmer File? I think it was actually in Farmer File. Either way, the story is, and I haven't reread it because I didn't want to, but it's a young character. I think he's in college maybe, and he goes to visit an uncle, and his uncle is very, very, very anti-Semitic. And his uncle's kind of losing his mind, and he thinks that there are people in his basement that are coming to get him, and they're hiding in the walls and all this. And it's all, you know, super, super anti-Semitic. But what's really interesting is that Phil wrote this in 1941, early days of World War II, while he was still in college. So, you know, the protagonist, the young college kid who goes to visit his uncle, was horrified by what his uncle's saying and thinking and doing, and can't get out of there fast enough. So Phil, you know, very early on, you know, was, you know, anti-Nazi, was very, you know, sympathetic to what was happening over there. But it was such an uncomfortable story to read that I didn't even want to reread it to discuss here on the panel. I'm just going with my memories. So it's either in Pearls from Peoria or I can take a quick look here on my computer. It was actually in Farmer File. So it's in Up from the Bottomless Pit and Other Stories, and it's in the Best of Farmer File. because everything Phil wrote in Farmer File ended up in the best of, except for the novel we serialized. But yeah, that was one that I'm proud of Phil for being brave enough to write that story while he was still in college. In around 1941, it wasn't published until the 2000s, but it was very uncomfortable to read. So that's my pick for that.
Okay. I think Jason next. You're next.
Yeah, this was a tough one, and I may answer this like a little bit differently. My pick is in the second book in the World of Tears series, Gates of Creation. Jadwin, the character Jadwin, he's the main character in that, and that book is basically has him and his siblings. And just to give you like a little bit of a background on that, Jadwin and his siblings are from a race called the Thoans, more commonly known as lords. They're an advanced race that are immortals. They have access to body modification technology, gates that allow you to travel between worlds, and even the technology to create new worlds and pocket universes. And they're not, besides Jadwin and maybe I think one of his siblings was a little more relatable, but for the most part, his siblings in that book there's just nothing very compelling or relatable about them. And to Farmer's credit, I think that was the point, because these, they're all this technology and everything that they had in these long lifespans. It's basically just cutthroat, these different lords, like, basically trying to kill each other and take each other's technology and territory. And during the course of the series, because although they have the technology, they've lost the knowledge. Like, none of them would know how to do this stuff from scratch. So all of these resources are fairly scarce. So that's probably the closest that I could come up with, just because that's just what popped into my head. His wolf. Yeah.
It's a tough question. No, I think that's perfectly reasonable answer.
And
I know the character.
It's interesting because the World of Tears series starts with Jadwin and Kekaha in the first book, and then the second book is just Jadwin and his siblings, as you said. And Phil kind of realized Kekaha is the more interesting character. So from the third book on, Kekaha becomes the main character of the series. We do see Jadwin from time to time, but Kekaha kind of takes things over. And yeah, I've had other people tell me the same thing over the years, that the world, they love the World of Tears series, but the second book is probably their least favorite. So it's definitely in line with how a lot of other people think about that series.
Cool. Okay, Frank.
Well, for me, it wasn't particularly hard. I had a visceral reaction the minute I read in the Riverworld series the character of Reinhard Heydrich, the very famous, infamous Nazi. And the reason is by the time I came to it, I'd seen I was born Jewish, and I did read about the Nazis since I was little, but there was a very famous movie called the Wannsee Conference, which was taken on the notes of the men who planned the final solution. And it was run by Reinhard Heydrich, and they got this German actor, because it was all in German, and this German actor who looked a great deal like him, not to his credit, really. And the casual evil of that man was astonishing. I mean, while he's planning the extermination of not just Jews, but a lot of other people in Europe, he's casually flirting with the secretary right in front of the entire room full of people while they're discussing these exterminations. And to Phil's credit, he did not make him a protagonist. I'm not going to ever say that. But he at times gave you a sense of sympathy towards him in this terrible plight he's in and all of that, and I couldn't give a crap. Excuse my language. But it's one of those situations where this man was probably one of the purest forms of evil of the 20th century, and even giving him the slightest bit of empathy was kind of rankling to me. But to Phil's credit, he did it in a way that it's like almost a torturous kind of thing for him. So that was my immediate reaction to it. I do love the it's not my favorite because I think it just dragged on too long more than anything else. But I like it a little better than the Harold Child series like Wynn was discussing, because at least the characters are trying to do things in that. Harold Child, it's everything is happening to him. At least the Riverworld people were actually trying to accomplish something in the main results. So that was my immediate reaction to it, though I still love that series.
And I know it's a bit of an aside, but was that film redone with an American-British audience?
It was. Kenneth Branagh took the Hydric part. Kenneth Branagh took the Hydric part, and it was done for, I believe, for HBO. The German version, I actually saw both versions. The German version is really actually more interesting because there's less Hollywood in it and a greater simplicity. It's literally each of the men that were involved in it sitting around a table, making jokes, acting like, honestly, like we're doing right now, just talking about a subject, led by the head of the SS and Gestapo, who was flirting with the secretary and then going back to the numbers of how we can kill these people. Very, very, very casually. That was the most amazing part to me, is I'd never seen the casualness to it. I mean, evil you expect. When you see evil, you expect it to be, Idi Amin, the Ayatollah Khomeini, Putin. I mean, you can really sense it when you see it. But when a group of guys are talking and laughing and acting like very normal men, while talking the most terrifying things you can possibly imagine, that's a little scarier to me than somebody who's secretly pulling their mustache like a traditional villain.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Frank. I'm going to move on to another question now, and it's we've talked about favourite characters and the adventures they're in. I just wonder, taking away the character, is there a favourite adventure story? So, irrespective of the characters that are in it, is there a favourite adventure story that you've got out of Phil's oeuvre? It may be the same one you talked about before. It might be a second. I'd like to think you picked the second favourite, maybe, if it is the same one. I'm going to try and mix it up a bit, and I'm going to ask that question of Jason first.
Okay. My favorite series overall is the Ancient Opar series, but I think probably the best adventure series would have to be the World of Tears over Ancient Opar, just in my opinion. I think that's like, it just has, there's more books in the series, more novels, I should say. The scope of it is pretty much unlimited. And as Mike was saying, once Kekaha jumped in there and became the main character in the third book proper, it really took off. So if we're sticking to like adventure, I would say like my favorite would be World of Tears. But I will say though that I think the Secrets of the Nine has some of Farmer's best action scenes, especially with where Lord Grunneth is concerned as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Can we go to Mike next?
Sure. if you read a lot of Farmer, a lot of his stuff set in the far future is not utopian. It's not great technology and all this stuff. It's all post-apocalyptic to one level or another. Society has fallen, and this is the remnants of it. You can think of the Cache. You can think of Dark as the Sun, which is set billions of years in the future, and things are very, very different, but it's very low tech. And for some reason, the novel Flesh, which is set about 800 years into the future, things have fallen apart. It's like, all right, we're going to do post-apocalyptic, but we're going to have fun with it. And there's just so much weird, bizarre, all these rituals, all these rites. Baseball has survived, sort of. It's, half the people who play a game of baseball get killed during the game. I mean, it's very, very violent. And just the whole idea of grafting antlers to this guy's head, which changes his physiology, gives him this virility so that he can have sex, dozens of times a day, and then marching him from, it's been a while since I've read it, I think from like Washington to New York or something, forcing him to have sex every day with all these women to fertilize the land, to make sure the population keeps growing. I just feel like Phil was like, all right, so society has fallen apart. Let's see how much fun we can have with that. I feel like that was probably his initial thought on writing that book. So that's one of my favorite worlds that he created.
Hey, Frank, you guys go next.
Yeah, sure. Lord of the Trees, the second of the 9 series. I mean, the sheer level of action that he put in that story was, it was right out of many pulps at one time. I mean, the man opened with the plane blowing up, and Lord Grunneth has to find a way to get into the ocean without dying because he doesn't have a parachute. James Bond was trying that stuff years later. I mean, it was brilliant. He kept the ethos of the World of the 9, but he added a level of action I just didn't expect. After having read Feast Unknown, I was given it the double version of it, so I got both books. And when I read Lord of the Trees, I was like, wow, he really went the pulp route with this and took it to a great level. And it was just pure, enjoyable entertainment, plus an awesome setup for the next book, The Mad Goblin, and, Wynn's book with Phil, Monster on Hold. I mean, really just especially awesome action that I probably tried to emulate my whole life since then.
Thank you, Frank. And that just leaves Wynn. I'll chip in as well, but Wynn first.
I've got a couple answers, but in terms of a whole series, like the series, an action series that he has that I think holds together the best as a whole thing, definitely World of Tears. I agree with Jason. It just, it's almost like he tops himself with every book, with every subsequent book that comes out in that series, and it actually has a great resolution while still leaving the door open to future adventures if Phil had ever wished to write those. So definitely agree with World of Tears. In the Mad Goblin, the Caliban book, there's this great action scene where Doc battles a cave bear, and just it's really not clear who's obviously it's a Doc Caliban book, but it's written in a way that you're just not sure. Wow, is Doc Caliban, is he going to survive this? I mean, he does not come out of that. He's torn to shreds coming out of that battle. That's just really gruesome, horrific, intriguing, exciting battle. But I'm going to give my final answer, sort of a weird, what's my favorite adventure? I don't know. The Adventure of the Peerless Peer. And that may seem like a weird answer because it's not it's not like full of battles and fights and action, you know, but I just think Phil had a ball writing that book. I think he was just sitting there giggling to himself and just having a great time writing that book. And you can see, I can see it on the printed page, with characters he loves and situations that he loves. So, you know, I don't know if that really answers specifically the question correctly or not, but
I think it,
those are some.
I think there'll be something. The mine is slightly different tack. Are you hearing me okay? I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And I'm going with a short story, and I'm going with The Blasphemers. It's a standalone short story. I just love it because of the way it moves along. It centers on a group of alien adolescents who are a bit rebellious and get into all sorts of trouble. You know, the story takes a couple of very hard left turns along the way, and they end up piloting an interplanetary spaceship, and they end up visiting Earth, and there's all sorts of connections with our history. And it is just such a great, fast-moving story, and I can't help thinking every time I read it that, you know, it's really 3 stories, and any other author, I think, would have probably split that into 2 or 3. And to his credit, Phil, you know, almost seamlessly stitched what could have been 3 separate stories into one rollicking adventure that leaves so many questions unanswered as well. You just at the end you think, oh, what's going to happen? You know, what has happened and what will happen? And I, for some reason, it's always just been just a favorite story. I just love the descriptions in it. I love the way it moves along. I love the way it turns when you don't expect it to turn. And I love the way that it leaves a little bit of self-interpretation at the end. So yeah, that's my choice. The Blasphemers. Thoroughly recommend it. Okay, I think we've got time for one final quick question, and I would ask if let's try and keep it quick, a couple of sentences, if that's okay. And the question is, what farmer character do you most closely relate to, or would you like to see yourself as? I'll kick off, and I'm going to say that I would like to be Ulysses singing there. I'd like to think, you know, that I'm in a situation that he faces, that, you know, my knowledge and my inner strength would allow me to have the same adventures, but I do fear that probably I'm more like Hal Yarrow, and whatever I do, I'll just make things 10 times worse than they ever were, and everything will just go to pot. So that's me, a mixture of Ulysses and Hal. Okay, I'm going to go to Frank.
Well, that was the hardest one of your questions. When you read it, it was like, ooh. You know, it's like, oh, I get my ego going here. But I'll stick to Lord Grunneth because he's always been who I wish I could be. I mean, I'm a martial arts instructor, but I'm certainly not on his level. So I would grab him. Plus, he has just such an interesting, unique life. Excellent.
Jason.
I'm going to say Hedone of Ancient Opar, because whenever I type his name on my cell phone, Hedone auto corrects to Jason on my cell phone. and I like to think Hayden, he usually always tries to do the right thing, and I like to think that I do as well.
Perfect. I love that answer. Mike.
Yeah, I had a really hard time with this one too. I think maybe, possibly, just slightly, I really couldn't come up with a good answer, but maybe Peter Jarius Frigate from the Riverworld series, which is obviously a stand-in for Phil, and he was conscious of that, you know, when he wrote the books, Frigate was very often indecisive. You know, he drove Burton crazy because Burton's a man of action. He's ready to go do something, and he would kind of hang back and not be, you know, as he wasn't ready to jump into the fray necessarily. And of course, you know, he was such a big fan of Burton's, he was constantly asking Burton questions, and I feel like I maybe did that to Phil quite a bit. You know, every time I'd visit him, I usually came with a list of questions, and actually did a big long interview of him one time for the website and stuff. So it's kind of funny because I don't see myself like Phil at all. But when I was trying to pick a character, that's kind of the only one I could come up with.
And your answer does beg a follow-up question, so apologies, Mike.
Oh, no.
Which freak? The one that's the imposter at the beginning, or the one that really was?
Probably the imposter.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Win?
So I picked John Gribardson / otherwise known as Sahindar, because first of all, I would never be like that character, but what it would be like to be that character, to have such a sense of adventure, to be completely willing to leave the world that you know, that you've left behind, the world of what I think 2070 is when they went, and go back in time 14,000 years, and then say, see ya, right? Like, I don't know what'll happen to me at all, but I'm leaving my time ship behind, and I'm going to go off and live in the past where I don't even know if I'll encounter other humans or not. I don't know what's going to happen, right? Just completely brave new world, complete unknown, what will happen? And to just sort of have that sense of adventure, you know, and sense of comfortableness with your own sense of being, to just say, I'm going to go and do this completely different thing, leave the world behind that I have known, and move into this other world, which is 100% unknown, is a pretty amazing concept. Now, all that said, is there anyone more perfect to do that than that character? No, of course not. I mean, that world was made for that character, so it's very clear why he did that, and that he knew that he had a great chance of surviving and thriving in that type of environment. But still, I mean, there's no guarantees. He didn't really know for sure. He just, you know, thought, if there's anyone up to it, it's me, so I'm going to do it, right? It's supremely confident. So that's why.
And I must admit, I see that story as probably the greatest escape story ever told, because he's escaping the modern world and, you know, buying himself 10, 14,000 years worth of new history and beyond, obviously. Yeah, good choice. Okay, I think I haven't missed anybody out, so I think we're about out of time now. I'd like to thank you all for participating, and thank you everybody who's watching this. I hope you found it interesting and perhaps a touch informative, and certainly from the five of us, thank you and goodbye.
All right, good to see everyone. Take care.
All right, so long.
All right,
Good one.
thanks.